I'm so glad you're joining me today for a presentation on soil and planting lessons from research. Be sure to check out these 10-minute university handouts. Each is 2 pages long, and all are free for download at cmastergardeners.org. The content of these handouts have been painstakingly collected from research-based information and then distilled down to a short length of essential information. I hope you put them to use. By the end of the hour, I hope you will gain a basic understanding of healthy soil and its importance to healthy plants, be able to describe how to prepare a plant for planting, and be able to describe how to prepare soil for planting, and finally, know best practices for after planting care. Soil has 3 components: mineral particles, organic matter, and space. If we look at healthy soil, the mineral particles should fill about 45% of the space. Organic matter, a combination of living organisms, roots, and what once lived, account for about 5%. And the rest, 50%, should be space for air and water. In this pie, they show the air and water each occupying half of the remaining space. But in real life, we know it's dynamic and ever changing. When the soil is fully saturated, water may occupy much more and perhaps nearly all of that space. And when the soil is dry, the opposite will be true. While the amount of water and air filling the space may change, what does not change is the importance of ample space in healthy soil. The space allows air and water to be there in order to serve the needs of roots so that they can grow, spread, breathe, and get nutrients. Soil texture comes from the mineral particles. By texture, I mean the feel you get by rubbing some soil in your fingers. Sand feels gritty, silt feels smooth, and clay feels sticky when it's when it's wet, and hard when it's dry. So sand and silt are shaped like miniature rocks, but clay is shaped like flat sheets. Soil scientists use the proportion of sand, silt, clay to classify soil into 12 textural classes. So think of them as groups. The triangle in the upper right shows all 12 of them together. Now, it's not important for us to know the names of these textural classes, but it is helpful for gardeners to know their characteristics. For example, loam is considered the gold standard in soil, with the good quantities of sand, silt, and clay, and giving it moderate ability for holding water, drainage, and fertility. In comparison, clay holds water longer, is rich in nutrient, and does not drain quickly. Yes, the much dreaded clay. Clay can be challenging to work with, but it's also an asset. Remember that clay is shaped like flat sheets. This gives them huge surface areas compared to sand and silt. And clay sheets carry negative charges, and this is very important because those negative charges allow clay sheets to attract positively charged particles. And that examples would be potassium, magnesium, calcium, iron. All of these are plant nutrients. So in soil water, clay particles will release these nutrients in exchange for oxygen. If you have clay, that means your garden soil is already a natural reservoir of plant nutrients. Keep your clay from compaction Maintain some moisture, don't let it dry out, and have the soil pH be close to 7. All of these will help clay soil feed your plants. Okay, let's take a look at soil structure. Soil structure refers to the arrangement of mineral particles and pore space between them. Soil life is the key to good structure. The illustration on the right shows how fungal hyphae, bacteria glue, and organic matter bind sand, silt, and clay particles together. And the illustration on the left shows particles come together to form PED, which is the building block of a soil, and then how various PEDs stack together to give soil structure. The interesting thing about soil structure is it's ever-changing and dynamic because PEDs last only about 4 weeks. So I suppose that means good news and bad news. The good news is if your soil is damaged, it can be repaired. The bad news is even if you have a good structure, you have to take care to not damage it. So the photo in the lower left shows soil looking dark, richly brown, and with lots of space in it. And that's what we aspire to have. If we want better drainage and better water holding capacity, we need to improve soil structure. And that means making more space in the soil. Take a closer look at this illustration. It shows space among and within PEDs. So each PED is a collection of orange-colored minerals, green organic matter, and blue water drops. We can see macropores, the space between PEDs, and we also see micropores, the space within a PED. When we water, if we did a good job, water will fill the micropores, and then the excess water will drain through the macropores. So macropores will support good drainage, and micropores determine the water holding capacity. But we're not alone in understanding the importance of soil microbes. In fact, plants behave as if they know that too. They have evolved the ability to attract microbes with food called exudates. These exudates ooze out of the plant roots to feed bacteria, fungi, and other soil life. And this makes the area right around the roots to have a very high concentration of soil microbes. One of the special association between root and one of the soil microbe fungi is called mycorrhizae. I know you're familiar with this word. You've heard it mentioned many times in recent years. In Greek, that word simply means fungus roots. So this is a beneficial association with fungus and roots grown together. And about 90% of the plants in the world have mycorrhizal associations with fungi. And in general, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So a plant may be associated with many types of fungi, and one kind of fungus may be associated with many kinds of plants. Regardless, in this partnership, the fungi gets carbohydrate because they don't have chlorophyll. They're not able to make their own food. So they need to get food somehow. And the plants will get water and nutrient in exchange. The additional benefit for plants, and this is very important, especially in our increasingly drought-stressed gardens, the fungal hyphae will reach far beyond the physical reach of plant roots. So in that process, they not only are getting water from a greater area for the plants, they're also helping to anchor the plant roots better. And the result is more drought-tolerant plants with better root stability. I know I get periodically annoyed with the occasional fungal disease I see in the garden. And then I have to remind myself the fact most fungi are essential decomposers in our ecosystem. When it comes to breaking down woody materials, fungi have extraordinary abilities bar none. Without them, our forests will be littered with down wood. And since they have no internal digestive system, they grow hyphae into the food and digest it there. So if you want to encourage more fungi in your garden ecosystem, first, do not disturb soil because digging, turning up soil will invariably break the fungal hyphae, and also give the fungi, the fungal spores, lots and lots of woody materials. Examples may include snags, logs, or woody mulch. And I'm going to say a lot more about woody mulch later in this presentation. So translating research into gardening practices, we can get healthy soil by feeding soil microbes because we know they are critical to soil structure and soil health. And a few simple things gardeners can do. First, grow a variety of plants over a long season. And this is because the variety of plants above ground will mean a variety of root architecture below ground. And that variety of root architecture and the unique formula each plant uses to make exudates, the combination means that we can support, feed many, many kinds and large numbers of soil microbes. The second thing we can do is add organic matter amendments after testing soil, because we know organic matter will be used by soil microbes. So in a way, organic matter is, when we add it to the soil, we're feeding microbes directly. And something else that's important is limit other inputs. Pesticides kill. Depending on the type you use, it may be killing the soil life community as well. And then I want to say something about fertilizer choices. When we use a synthetic fertilizer, we are directly feeding plants. When we use an organic fertilizer, they have to be converted by microbes into forms that's usable by plants. So in a sense, the synthetic fertilizer is putting microbes out of a job, or at least some of them that are involved in breaking down organic fertilizer. So if you want to have diversity among the soil life, organic fertilizer is going to encourage that. And another approach to getting good soil is protecting soil structure through minimizing disturbance. Minimize digging, tilling, walking on it. Because when we do that, we're destroying the soil structure that's there, squeezing out the spaces and the air that may be in it, and compacting the soil. Especially bad is if we have clay-heavy soil and we dig and work it when it's too wet. We all know when that happens, the wet clay soil can lose the structure and it takes forever to rehabilitate. A second thing we can do is mulch. Mulch with coarse wood chips, large chunks of woody materials. And I'm going to say a lot more about that later on in this presentation. One thing I want to bring to your attention is it's a mistake that I've made, and I know many other seasoned gardeners have made, and that is over enriching the soil with amendments. So there was a time when I thought you just cannot overdo organic matter. The more, the merrier. Well, that's wrong. A recent Oregon State study shows that seasoned, conscientious gardeners over-amend their vegetable garden. So if you're one of those people who have continued to continue this habit of adding compost over the years to the same area, your soil is probably too rich in some or many nutrients, and it's definitely time to get a soil test and know for sure. So I'll tell you what the OSU study found. They sampled gardens in the Willamette Valley and in Central Oregon. And these are all gardens of master gardeners, designated areas for growing vegetables, including raised bed and in-ground growing operations. And they found shockingly high levels of phosphorus, nitrogen, magnesium, manganese, organic matter, many times the recommended optimal range. So if that is the case for your garden soil, you should stop adding compost and manure, and you only use fertilizer as needed. And that means only if your plants are not growing well. And in addition, we know from experience and from research that nitrogen is highly mobile, and that's sometimes maybe the only fertilizer you need, since many of the other macro and micronutrients are used in small amount and tend to be abundant in our local soils. So think about perhaps only using blood meal, feather meal. These are organic options for nitrogen fertilizer, or ammonium sulfate, which is a synthetic option. Now you may be wondering, well, what's the big deal if the soil is too rich? Well, I'm just going to pick on phosphorus for a minute. If the soil has too high levels of phosphorus, number one, it will inhibit mycorrhizae association, because you see phosphorus specializes in getting water and not getting water, mycorrhizae specializes in getting phosphorus. And if the soil already has a lot of phosphorus, the mycorrhizae does not have an opportunity to use its special ability. So it will simply go into a corner and become not active. The second problem with phosphorus is there are a number of studies showing super high levels will interfere with the plant's ability to take up other nutrients. So among the studies I looked at, high level of phosphorus interfere with iron uptake in rhododendron, manganese uptake in peach, a variety of micronutrient uptake in macadamia. These are just a few examples. And then finally, there's the issue of polluting our local streams and lakes. As the phosphorus rich soil run off into lakes and streams, we get eutrophication. So I'm ending the first component of the information, and there are a number of resources for you if you would like to learn more. And we're moving on to how to prepare a plant before planting. The short message is prepare the roots before planting. Research shows it makes a big difference. And this is why, if you look at the illustration on the left, it's clear that roots like to grow sideways and out, but containers will not allow them to do that. And when we purchase a plant, whether due to not correctly being repotted at the nursery or just being left in the pot for too long, we inherit the dysfunctional roots, and we need to correct it before planting. So these are the steps in root correction. And we're using a tree as an example. And these photos are from Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott, who is a very strong proponent of root preparation before planting. So step one, in order to see the root, we have to remove the medium around it. And it's best to do this during cool weather in a shady area and keep your roots moist. And then we take a close look at the roots, and what we're checking is which way are they pointed. We want the roots to follow a pattern like arms of a starfish. So anything that's going the wrong direction should be taken off. So in this picture, we can see one that's going up, not good. We can see a number that are curved, not good. Now you might wonder, well, what's wrong with the ones that are curved? Well, as these roots continue to grow, eventually they will girdle other roots and kill the tree. So this is how it looks after surgery. There is nothing pointed the wrong direction. And I know cutting off so many roots may seem harsh, but the fact is these misdirected roots will not correct themselves. Once we put them in the ground, they'll continue to go the direction that they're pointed. And I've mentioned the problem of circling roots will girdle the tree. And even shrub plants can benefit from this. Here's an example showing pot-bound shrub with the roots circling on the bottom. And so we tease apart the roots, remove the medium, and free all the roots so they're prepared and ready for going into the ground. And finally, an example with a perennial plant that obviously had sat in the container for too long. And the way to do it is cut off the bottom and remove the medium and straighten out the roots. And this will allow us to see really how big the roots are in order to dig the correct planting hole. So here are a couple of resources from Linda Chalker-Scott on the root washing. And now we go on to how to prepare soil for planting. So the key message here is interface in soil is a problem. If you're not familiar with the word interface, it means when two soil textural classes come together, if they're different, that difference will create an impediment to a barrier to movement of air, water, and roots and nutrient. Ooh, I see a misspelled word. Ooh. So take a look at the soil triangle on the left. I had shown you earlier 12 types of soil as classified by soil scientists. So if you have one type of soil meet another type of soil from the soil triangle, there's an interface where they come together. Now, when we plant into the garden, we're not likely to be talking about those soil types, but instead, we're dealing with these soil types. The container media is one type. The native soil would be one type. And if you have a habit of amending the backfill soil, that's another type. So it would be a poor planting practice if we create interface when we plant. So that would mean if I put a container plant with the media in place, with the roots in it, into a soil, into the native soil where I've dug a hole. So that will be two types, container media, native soil. If I amend the backfilled soil, so I would end up with three types, even more interfaces. I would have the container material, the amended backfill material, and then the native soil. So our recommendation is remove the potting mix and do not amend the backfill. And I know this may not work for everyone. And later on, I will offer some alternatives. But let's talk about the steps for making the planting hole. The size of the hole should be as deep and at least twice as wide as the root mass. And it should be shaped like a shallow bowl. Now, it's not critical for it to be a perfect shallow bowl. You can have the sides be vertical, and that will be fine. It's important for you to crack the sides with a spading fork so you can create even better mixing between the native soil in this area and the adjoining area. And then you want to remove any roots, large rocks, foreign materials from this hole, fill it with water, and drain it. While that's going on, your excavated native soil should be broken up if there are huge chunks. And then you mound the soil in the center of the hole you made. You want to place the roots over the mound and spread it outward like a starfish. Then check the crown to make sure it's above the soil level. And fill the hole with native soil, water well, and you confirm the soil with hands, but not with feet, because we don't want it to become too compacted. So all of this talk about roots is a reflection of our increased understanding of roots. Way back, people thought the architecture of roots is kind of a mirror image of the crown. Well, that's definitely not right. Today, we understand the roots go far beyond the edge of a drip line, for example, in trees. And we also know even in trees, most of the roots are much shallower than we thought. Often it's in the top 18 to 24 inches. And one problem with amending the backfilled soil is that when the amendment breaks down, the soil level will become lower. And we know from research, planting at the correct level is critical to tree survival. I'm just going to quickly review one study from Clemson University. They were checking planting depth on survival. And they had three groups of trees. One group planted at the correct level, one planted 6 inches too deep, and a third group 12 inches too deep. 2 years later, all the controls were doing well, and the deeper plantings, half of them are dead. Well, why? Because when roots are buried so deep, oxygen and water cannot penetrate to reach them. Remember, a well-planted tree should show root flare just above the soil surface. And you can see the root flare in this photo. It is where the trunk meet the roots. Make sure it's exposed. So in this series of photos, the bottom photo is good. You can see the root flare very clearly. And the top photo is not good because there is a mulch volcano surrounding the base of the tree. And this thick layer of broken down, kind of composted wood chips is creating a barrier for oxygen and water to reach the roots. And it also is probably tracking moisture against the bark, which can promote pathogen attack. So luckily, fixing it is easy. We simply push back the mulch materials, expose the root flare, which is here, and then remove everything above it. Cut those shallow roots off. And that's it. So if you have trees in your yard, I ask you to go out, look at them, see if the flare is visible, and if not, do the same surgery. It's good for their health. Earlier, I was talking about do not amend the backfill soil. And that's probably difficult to hear. if you garden in clay or compacted soil, and it's just really challenging. So the truth is, it took me a long time to come around to this idea because I began to garden when double digging was the gold standard for soil preparation. So you dig it really deep and you amend very heavily. And that means that you're a really good, conscientious gardener. And so when I first learned that we should not amend, when I went through the Master Gardener training, I just could not believe it. Well, let's take a closer look at the pros and cons of amending soil. Well, there are clear benefits. The immediate change of the planting bed from something that's compacted and perhaps nutrient poor to something that's much lighter, have lots of organic matter, be able to hold water better, have more space for air. Uh, what's wrong with that? Of course we like that, but there's some potential problems. The first thing is if you add too much organic matter, remember organic matter is food for soil microbes. So you're encouraging soil microbes to break them down. And microbes need nitrogen to do the breakdown. So what happens is while they are using nitrogen to break down the organic matter, you could be depleting the available nitrogen for your plants in that same area. We already know digging and mixing organic matter into the soil is also destroying the soil structure and harms soil food web. And in addition, whatever you choose to bring in could and most likely will increase the soil salinity, bring more salt into the garden. You can transfer contaminants, weed seeds, and pathogen to the garden as well. Well, I know this little pro and con analysis is not going to change your mind if you are set to get instant improvement. So let's say you choose to amend and you're making a new bed for annual flowers and vegetables. This is what you should do. You should always do a soil test because you need a baseline to know where you are starting from and how does the amendment change things over time. You would be mixing the organic amendment into the full depth of plant roots. And this is not where you're planting today, but the future plant roots. So let's say you're planting small things, flowers, etc. Chances are the roots are in the top 12 inches. So that's the area where you need to work your amendment into. And if you're growing tomatoes, they can grow, their roots can reach 2 feet below ground. So then you want to work your amendment into, from the surface to 2 feet. So the main point is if you amend the entire area, and that's the area for the future plant roots, not where you planted. Of course, you should do a soil test to determine the actual quantity of amendment, but if the soil has never been amended before, you may be adding up to 4 inches. And this, I'm thinking, using yard waste compost as an example. And if it has been previously amended, then it could be, half the quantity. And if you're growing annual vegetables and flowers and you need the result quickly, that means that you're going to continue to use amendment and fertilizer for that very fast performance. And in that instance, we recommend you test your soil every 3 years. So you are always acting from a position of knowing what's there before adding more. Now, if you're doing a new bed, but it's for something that's more permanent, perennial plants, long, same process, add materials based on soil test result and work it into the full depth of future plant roots. See, this is important because remember we talked about interface and avoiding interface. So amending the entire area is basically taking interface out of the equation when you plant. If this bed has long-lived plants, this improvement is temporary because when the organic matter breaks down, your soil level will drop and the organic matter content will be lower. But we don't recommend routinely adding organic matter without clear evidence of need. So you should be looking at how well do the plants grow in addition to perhaps future soil tests for indications of when you need to do more. Now, if you're planting trees or shrubs, well, I think there's no point because it's just not practical to amend the soil in the future root zone of a mature tree or even, a shrub, most shrubs. So in this instance, consider mulching with 4-inch layer of coarse wood chips, arborist wood chips that are fresh is better. And you should mulch an area that is 30 inches from the trunk or greater. And you want to feather to the trunk so it does not keep the trunk moist to invite pathogen and other problems. Well, what if you only have an established garden and you're not making anything new and they're already planted with perennials, shrubs, and trees? This is what you can do. You can use 1/2 inch to 1 inch of compost as a top dress. Just lay it on the soil surface. Don't work it into the soil. Or you can use arborist wood chips as described above. So up to 4-inch layer around the root zone. And I'm going to say more about the benefit of these. So finally, we're getting to the last objective, best practices for after planting care. And I'm going to talk about mulching, staking, watering, fertilizing, and pruning. The purpose for after planting care is to help plants establish. So you might ask, well, how long does it take for a transplant to become established? Well, first, to be clear, establishment means growing new roots to replace the lost roots. So as you can imagine, if we're talking about transplanting a little annual, that may be a day or two. And if we're talking about a large tree, that may be many, many years. Of course, it depends on species because there are genetic differences in how fast plants grow. And I've already mentioned the size of the transplant can make a big difference. Well, climate also makes a difference because in warmer places, plants just grow faster than in cooler places. And the site condition, for example, soil makeup and soil fertility can make a difference. But after planting care definitely factors into the equation. This research project from University of Minnesota looked at establishment period after planting. Now, keep in mind, when you transplant a large tree, whether it's a 1-inch caliper tree or a 6-inch caliper, there will be a fair amount of root loss or root damage in that process. And of course, when I say caliper, I mean using an instrument like this, and imagine your tree trunk is right here between these two probes. That tells you the caliper of your tree. And if you don't have this instrument, you can always estimate it by using a ruler. So this is what they found out. For every inch of trunk caliper, it's 1.5 years on average for the root to make up what was lost through new roots. So as you can see, this is a very long period. And during that period, we need to give it good care in order for it to be established. All right, so I'm going to share a research project with you because this contains partly the explanations for what we should do and the reasons for why we should do it. So to summarize the finding, the headline would be wood chip and compost improve soil quality and increase growth. And they tested using two kinds of tree, a maple and a birch. And this is how they did it. They want to simulate planting trees into compacted, impoverished urban soil. So the study area, they brought in heavy equipment, scrape off the topsoil, ran equipment over it to compact the soil, and then they dumped about an inch of some topsoil mix, so it's barely anything, as a way to simulate what happens to kind of urban soil in typical housing development, for example. And then they planted these trees and treated the trees in 6 different ways. One is serves as a control. The control group just got watered, nothing else. And then they had 5 treatments to compare the results against the control. And the 5 treatments are shown on your screen. One group had wood chip mulch, 6 inches. One group had compost top dressing, 1 inch. One group had inorganic fertilizer. And then the other 2 groups, one had aerated compost tea, and one had a commercial biological product. So the last 2 had no effect, significant effect from the control. So we'll take them off the table. The inorganic fertilizer ended up allowing the trees to grow faster compared to the control group. But compare that against the first 2 groups, wood chip mulch and compost top dressing. Well, I would say those 2 groups did better. So let's look at the details. In tree growth, the wood chip mulch group did twice, almost 3 times better compared to the control group that only had water. And the compost group did almost twice as better than the control group. So that means wood chip mulch and compost help trees grow faster in the initial establishment period. Inorganic fertilizer also helped, but it did not do as well as the compost group or the wood mulch group. Now let's take a look at soil quality. The wood chip mulch group, the soil showed higher organic matter, higher soil moisture, higher soil microbe numbers, and then lower bulk density. Well, what's bulk density? Bulk density is a way to measure how much space there is in soil. So if we have a low bulk density, that means we have more space in soil. And this to me is significant. So remember, if your soil is compacted and you want to make more space in your soil, wood chip mulch is a way to go. The compost top dressing group also did pretty well for soil. Higher organic matter, higher soil moisture, and higher count of soil microbes. It also led to higher pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So what does this mean? Remember back a few slides when I said if you only have established garden beds and you're not making any new beds, but you want to improve the soil, go this route. Go with wood chips where you can as a mulch, and go with a thin layer of compost top dressing as a mulch if you have smaller plants, because both help with soil improvement and plant growth. So if you choose to do woody mulch, 4 inches, fresh is better than composted because the fresh material has carbon in the form that's ready to be used. And that's the ideal food for fungi to feed upon and to enrich the soil microbiology. And of course, as a mulch, it stays on the top. You want to cover the entire root zone, and as the tree grows, root zone expand, you want to widen it and feather to the trunk. Now let's look at staking. Number one, staking is not necessary. It's only less necessary when you have a really top-heavy plant or if you're planting into a windy location. And you want to drive the stakes into the ground before planting so that you don't have the risk of damaging roots. And you want to use tie materials that will not damage the bark. You want to tie in a way that the attachment is in the lower 1/3 and it's loose enough to allow a wiggle, because research has shown wiggle is key to developing taper. And what's taper? The trunk of the tree is wider at the bottom than on the top, and that is critical for a healthy tree structure. And you want to keep the stake no more than 1 year. So look at this here, lower 1/3, so the point of attachment is not bad. Abrasion on the tree, too tight, not good. And one stake is already rotted. So I would think that's been there for more than probably 2-3 years, too long. So we're talking about water next. Water is essential for establishment and growth. And the most important thing is you have to determine the need by checking the soil moisture. So figure out how you're going to do it, whether it's digging down, poking your finger into the soil, using a soil moisture reader. And of course, it depends on the area you live. In the Willamette Valley, fall planting will need less supplemental water than the spring planting. But if you do plant in the fall, make sure you fully hydrate plants before freeze. And you want to wet the entire root zone. So use something that delivers small trickle of water to avoid losing water and make sure that you saturate the root zone. So how much water? That's a question we get again and again and again, and there's no clear answer. For most plants, the recommendation is 1 inch per week. And 1 inch per week means if you're looking at soil surface that's 1 square foot, it's 0.62 gallons. So keep that number in mind. If you have 5 square feet area of root area to cover, that's about 3 gallons, and multiply, go from there. And of course, that quantity has to be higher in hotter weather. Well, what about trees? They need, according to this study, at least 1 to 1.5 gallon of water per caliper of tree trunk. And that's for 1 session. That's not per week. So how many sessions per week? Well, for a newly planted tree, it may be several sessions, maybe 2 or 3. Depends on the weather, depends on if you have any natural precipitation, your soil type. Clay soil will not need to be watered as often as loamy or sandy soil. And so you'll have to make adjustment. Now, one thing that sometimes people forget is a freshly planted tree, we remember to water it. But after 2-3 years, we think, it's established, it'll be fine. Well, no, it will need care for a much longer period. How many years after planting? Well, different sources say different numbers. Oregon State says 5 years, all right? But keep in mind, in recent 2, 3, 5 years, we are seeing a number of trees that are established, mature, in fact, for example, Western red cedar failing. And so we may need to water trees, even mature ones, during the summer. So I'm going to wrap up with transplants don't need fertilizers. There is no need for all-purpose fertilizer because when you stimulate top growth, often that interferes or inhibit the root growths, which is not good because we want our transplants to first focus on growing roots. And the so-called transplant fertilizer is high in phosphorus, which is very seldom deficient in Willamette Valley soil. And I've already mentioned all the problems with having too much phosphorus in soil. So I will move on to the final point, which is pruning. Remove anything that is dead, damaged, or disease. That's it. Don't buy into the myth like you have to prune off the top to compensate for root loss. No. You have to paint cuts to help heal the wound. No. But do remember this. If you are transplanting or planting a relatively young tree, I would say a tree that's in its first 10 years or so, you do need to shape and train your tree for good structure. Beginning year 2, probably 3-4 times in the first 15 years. And this video on pruning ornamental trees will tell you how to prune a tree or train a tree for good structure. And again, more resources on this segment. So let's review all the ideas that we've talked about. For healthy soil, it's important the soil have lots of space. We know soil life is critical to get good structure. We want to plant diversity and add organic matter to feed soil microbes to get good structure. But in adding organics, test the soil, don't overdo it. And mulch is a good way to protect the soil structure and feed the soil microbes. When it comes to preparing a plant, correct the roots before planting. When it comes to preparing soil, do not create interface. So plant in the way that is not encouraging or resulting in interface. And finally, the best practices, less is more when it comes to staking or fertilizing or pruning, but don't skip your attention and your resources when it comes to watering and mulching. And now we're done. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Sherry. How perfect timing this presentation was, as the sun is out and everybody is outside and dying to get out in the garden. So we have a few questions. Is it a good or a bad idea? And this is assuming that she's done a soil test. Is it a good or bad idea to just order one of those 3-way mixes from the landscape, that contain manure and maybe sand and pumice? Or should she use planting compost and soil conditioner and omit the 3-way plan?
Okay, so I think both could work in gardens, so it depends on what your circumstance is. If you have clay heavy soil and you want to condition it and make it easier to work, you could add a certain amount of compost. Yard debris compost probably is better than manure-based compost because the yard debris materials will have lower nutrient input and minimize the buildup of phosphorus, for example. If you need soil for a huge area and simply adding compost will not give you the volume you need, then you're having to import new materials. And in that instance, if you're adding the material to a place where there has been regular amendments, I would choose something that is low in manure because manure has higher salts and than other input. So
Great answer. I know that this person that asked this question is not unique. He cannot really have a big load of wood chips delivered to the front of his yard. And he thinks that it's a good idea, would like to do that. He's wondering, should he substitute something from the landscape company like a large bark dust or something like that he could substitute?
Yeah, I know I have the same problem because, the free chips is just so much.
Right.
It's impossible.
It's a mountain. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's so a number of possibilities. The you can buy commercial products depending on where you live, but you want to look at the materials that they offer you, and you want to choose the largest size particles as much as is available. And the reason is because if you have coarse materials, when you think about how they stack together, there's always a lot of room between them. And our goal is to have a mulch material that has room for air and water to flow through. So they're doing the good things in feeding soil life and protecting the soil, and they're not impeding the transfer of air or gas. If you use a really fine material like compost as a mulch and have a thick layer, that can create a problem because look at how compost will behave on top of the soil. They will form a thick layer when it's wet and become a barrier to movement of water and air. And also they can dry out and become crusted on the surface and will make water penetration even that much harder.
Mhm. Good answer. Um, we had one caller who amends with bone meal every year, and she realizes now big error on her part. But when she does, she sees a fungal growth with the bone meal, and she thinks, is that just the bone meal breaking down, or has she got contaminated bone meal? She's worried about that.
Oh, I would not worry too much about it. I would say the important thing is stop amending without knowing that you really need it. And in general, if you're seeing fungus doing something in the soil, usually the visible ones actually are not pathogen. They're actually breaking down. They're the
The
decomposers.
good guys. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So, what you can see, you probably don't need to worry about.
Perfect. Is there a best time to do soil testing? Would you recommend a best time? That came up a couple times.
I think I don't know if there is a best time. In the Willamette Valley, I know after the rainy winter, you can expect low level of nitrogen because it would have been washed out.
Mhm.
So it kind of depends on your purpose for doing the soil testing. But if you're doing soil testing, you want to do it at the same time of the year, roughly. So, let's say you did a soil test 5 years ago and you did it in March. In future tests, you want to do it around the same time of the year. So they're more comparable.
Comparing
But
results.
yeah,
Mhm.
but for
Okay.
me, I just based it on how easy it is to dig in the garden because I don't really like to dig up a bunch of wet mess, and plus it's not good for the soil. So I'll do it either in the fall or in the spring. In the fall, I know the nitrogen level will be higher. In the spring, I expect it to be lower, but yeah.
Right. Um, Nursery soil tests. People get impatient. They realize that if they hire a lab to test their soil, there's a bit of a wait time, and now they're already out anxious. They want to get out there. Do you recommend any nursery soil tests?
I'm not aware of any little kit that you can purchase that will give you accurate information. So I would say buy the bullet and just get one, from a lab because it's more important to get accurate information. But, there are a lot of things you can do in gardening without knowing the soil test result as long as you're not amending, right?
Right.
So hold off on fertilizing and amending and, go ahead and plant and, do your pruning and clean up, etc. You can do all those things.
Okay. One last question, and this is one that I know is shared among people that live in the Willamette Valley who have clay soil. She says her soil is very wet. When she wants to plant, she waits for it to dry out before she plants, but it's hard. It's to dig just to soak it. How can she not need to amend that soil? And I don't believe you were saying not amend that soil. So she clearly needs to improve her soil so it's got some microbiotic activity going on there. So what do you recommend she do?
My recommendation is if you have soil that's really difficult to garden, whether it's too wet, too dry, too compacted, too hard to dig, amend it, but amend it in a way that's thoughtful. And that means do a soil test so you know where you're starting out from, add materials and mix it into the soil that will cover the future root zone of the plants intended for the area. So you're not creating interface. So either amend the whole area, don't do it, a little area at a time, because then you're creating all sorts of interface. So if you have soil that's too wet, you may need to do something to improve drainage in addition to amending, adding organic materials. You may need to create berms. There may be a lot of other things that should go hand in hand with the
Mhm.
soil amendment.
Excellent question. And I know there are a lot of people watching that are out there thinking what their next steps are for spring planting. Thanks so much, Sherry. It was a wonderful presentation.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Cheryl, for
Uh-huh.
co-hosting.
All
And
righty.
everybody, we hope we'll see you next week for the IPM class. And if you did not get your question answered, go ahead and send it to the 10 Minute University email address, and we're happy to answer them.